We are resumed. For our second panel, we welcome Jennifer Wright, Executive Director of the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council, Scott Ross, Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and from the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, we welcome Catherine Lassar, Chair of the Business Risk Management Working Group, and Mike, I should have asked you, Mike, help me. Mike Kromzak, Vice Chair of the Business Risk Management Working Group. Thank you all for joining us. We'll begin with your opening remarks before we move to questions from members. You will have 5 minutes. I will signal your time is running out at the 1 minute mark by staring at you quite hard. And with that, the floor is yours, Ms. Wright.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to speak today. Canada's ability to maintain food sovereignty depends on a strong and innovative agriculture and agri-food sector, one that is supported by a skilled, stable workforce capable of producing, processing, and delivering food in an increasingly complex global environment. When we talk about food sovereignty in Canada, we often think about land, inputs, equipment, and access to markets. But there is another critical factor that is sometimes overlooked. Food sovereignty is not just about what we produce. It is whether we have the people needed to produce it. Canada's agriculture and agri-food sector is one of the pillars of our national economy. It contributes roughly $150 billion to Canada's GDP each year, about 7% of the national economy, and supports 1 in every 9 jobs across the country. It supports our rural communities, sustains our economy, and ensures that our country can produce safe, high-quality food for our population and for global markets. But most importantly, this sector feeds Canadians. The strength of this system depends on one crucial resource: people. People are the foundation of Canada's food system, from planting crops and caring for livestock to operating advanced machinery, processing food, and transporting products across the country. Without the workforce that powers these activities, food production simply cannot happen. And that's where we face a serious challenge. Labour market data from CARC shows that Canada's agriculture sector continues to face chronic and growing labour shortages. Our most recent data on primary production indicates that in 2022, roughly 28,000 jobs were left unfilled during peak season, resulting in an estimated $3.5 billion in lost sales for Canadian agriculture. That's not just lost opportunities in the abstract, but crops that could not be harvested, production that could not expand, and food that never made it to markets. The primary production side of the industry alone employs over 351,000 Canadian workers, along with approximately 71,000 temporary foreign workers, who play an essential role in supporting seasonal and specialized labour needs. Yet despite these contributions, the workforce gap is expected to widen. By 2030, Canada's agriculture sector may face a vacancy rate of up to 15%, up from 7% in 2022, driven in part by an aging workforce with over 85,000 workers expected to retire in the coming years. This is not simply a labour issue, it's a food sovereignty issue. If farms cannot find workers, crops remain in the field. If processors cannot staff their facilities, production slows. If supply chains lack skilled workers, food becomes more expensive and less accessible. In other words, workforce capacity is directly tied to Canada's food sovereignty. At the same time, agriculture is evolving rapidly. Today's farms and food businesses are highly sophisticated operations that rely on advanced technology, automation, precision agriculture, and data-driven decision-making. The sector needs workers with a wide range of skills, from equipment technicians and animal care specialists to data analysts, food scientists, and logistics experts. This means the solution to workforce shortages is not just about filling jobs. It's about supporting a modern, skilled workforce that will remain to power the future food production in Canada. And that requires 3 things. First, we must strengthen domestic talent pipelines by increasing awareness of agriculture careers and investing in training and skills development to upskill, reskill, and retain the current workforce. Second, we must continue to support responsible and effective pathways for international workers, recognizing the vital role international workers play in sustaining our food system. And third, we must ensure that workforce planning is treated as a core pillar for not only Canada's food policy, but for the overall economic strategy in Canada. The work of CARC and its labour market research helps us understand these challenges and plan for the future of the sector. The National Workforce Strategic Plan for Agriculture and Food and Beverage Manufacturing brings focus to all stakeholders on the actions needed to ensure the required workforce is there now and in the future. Ultimately, food sovereignty is not just about land, technology, or markets. It's about our people. It is about ensuring Canada has the skilled, resilient workforce needed to produce food sustainably, competitively, and reliably for generations to come. A resilient agriculture workforce is not simply an industry issue. It should be a national priority to be tied to food security, economic growth, and sovereignty. I look forward to the questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Next, we will go to Mr. Ross. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Scott Ross. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. The CFA is Canada's largest general farm organization, representing more than 190,000 farmers and farm families across Canada. Canada's agriculture and agri-food sector contributes $150 billion to GDP and supports 2.3 million jobs, making it a strategic driver of economic growth and rural vitality. When we talk about food security, we need to recognize that it's not one issue in isolation, but a complex and interconnected system that extends well beyond the farm gate and Canada's borders. It involves farmers producing food, processors transforming raw products, distributors and transportation networks moving goods across vast distances, retailers setting prices and managing supply, and governments shaping policy and regulation. It also includes global trade systems, labor availability, and consumer purchasing power. For example, a drought in one region can affect global grain prices, while a labor shortage at processing plants can disrupt supply chains, and transportation bottlenecks can delay food traveling across vast distances to reach remote communities. All of these elements interact to determine the extent to which Canadians have reliable access to affordable food. In a Canadian context, food security discourse has traditionally focused on matters of affordability rather than sovereignty, productive capacity, and supply chain resilience. Canada produces enough food and participates in a global market that provides variety, but rising costs mean many households struggle to afford it. Although Canadians have faced steadily increasing food prices in recent years, farmers receive only a small and shrinking share of what consumers pay at the checkout. According to RBC, raw agricultural commodities account for roughly 10% of retail food prices. The remaining costs come from processing, packaging, and transportation, sectors heavily influenced by supply chain disruptions. Many agricultural commodities traded on global markets have seen little price growth. Meanwhile, farmers are burdened with escalating production costs, squeezing their margins even further. As a result, Canadian farmers and farm gate pricing have, at best, a very modest capacity to influence retail food prices. But Canada's food system does not operate in isolation. Farmers are part of a global marketplace where supply and demand dynamics shape production decisions. Within this context, there are factors farmers can influence and others that are beyond their control. Farmers can control production practices, investment decisions, and to a certain extent, succession planning and risk management strategies that build resilience and prepare for the future. However, many of the most significant risks to stable food production are largely outside their control, such as weather and climate variability, global commodity pricing, labor availability and disruptions, input costs, and geopolitical instability. Farmers' capacity to adopt innovative technologies and practices holds some potential to mitigate these forces, but access to many cutting-edge technologies remain constrained by slow, unclear, and costly regulatory approval pathways. This reality underscores why supportive policies and a stable regulatory environment are essential. Farmers can adapt and innovate, but they cannot offset systemic risks alone. Perhaps Canada's biggest and most existential risk to food security is that agriculture is not valued or prioritized at the national level in the way it should be. As the government develops a new national food security strategy, this is the moment to anchor long-term investment in the sector to strengthen food security, sovereignty, and Canada's overall resilience. Doing so requires prioritizing high-impact, future-focused areas where Canada can lead globally and reduce dependence on foreign supply chains, including ensuring farmers and food production remain at the center of Canada's food security, reducing unnecessary regulatory burdens that add cost to food production without strengthening food security outcomes, streamlining approval processes and improving access to food innovations, plant science, and animal genetics, making Canada the top destination globally for investment in value-added processing, becoming a leader in the development, adoption, and export of ag-tech innovation, and modernizing Canada's transportation and trade infrastructure to improve supply chain efficiency. Ensuring long-term food security, food sovereignty, and sector competitiveness require a whole-of-government approach. Only coordinated cross-departmental policy, supported by targeted investment, modernized regulation, and shared national objectives can truly deliver on the promise of food security and economic sovereignty for Canadians. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Lastly, we will go over to Ms. Lassar and Mr. Kromzak for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mrs. Chair and honorable senators. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. In addition to being the chair of the Business Risk Management Working Group of the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, I am also the Deputy General Manager of the Quebec Produce Growers Association. Ensuring Canadians have reliable access to safe and nutritious food depends on many factors. One of the most important is maintaining our ability to produce food locally rather than relying on imports. Local production is a key pillar of food security. Across the country, growers are facing increasing pressures that affect their ability to continue supplying locally grown fruits and vegetables. The fruit and vegetable sector is one of the most labor-intensive in Canadian agriculture. Many crops must be planted and harvested by hand, often within very short time windows. If workers are not available at the right moment, crops can simply be lost. In Quebec, for example, growers rely heavily on the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program and the agricultural stream of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program to ensure that fruits and vegetables are planted and harvested. These programs have been essential to the sector for decades. However, when there are delays, administrative barriers, or uncertainty in the rules, growers face a very real risk that crops may not be planted or harvested, with direct consequences for food security. We saw this during the pandemic, when many acres of asparagus and lettuce were lost in Quebec simply because there were not enough workers available to harvest them. Food security is also increasingly affected by extreme weather events, which can significantly reduce fruit and vegetable production. To adapt, farmers need to adopt innovative practices supported by strong research. Investing in research is therefore an important part of strengthening food security. Farmers also need programs that help them manage climatic and market risks. My colleague, Mike Kromzak, will speak about these.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Ms. Chair and honorable senators. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Mike Kromzak, and I am the chair of the Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, Catherine's co-chair at FVGC, and a proud farmer. Today, fruit and vegetable growers are part of the primary agricultural backbone keeping Canada's food supply chain intact, nourishing Canadians with fresh produce and supplying processors and the entire agri-food economy. We consistently operate with very narrow profit margins and exceptional production risks. Growers continue to face stubborn production increases, weather volatility, changing pest pressure, labor challenges, market volatility, and competitiveness gaps with neighboring jurisdictions that continue to erode margins and threaten the integrity of our domestic food security. Federal business risk management programs have proven to be an important tool for farmers to ensure food security and food sovereignty in Canada. We have several well-designed programs in place. However, many of these programs have been cut significantly over the past 13 years. In addition, many programs are reactive in nature, instead of helping to mitigate risks and invest in strengthening the supply chain. The Advanced Payment Program is a great example of a well-designed mechanism to get interest-free operating credit to farmers efficiently. The APP defaults each year to a $100,000 interest-free limit and requires ministerial approval each spring to increase it. A permanent interest-free limit of at least $350,000 makes the program more certain for growers and delivers effective cash flow support upfront when growers need it the most. Restoring the agri-stability trigger to 85% with an 80% compensation rate would also significantly strengthen the competitiveness and support for fruit and vegetable farmers that we need, while still staying within the guardrails of WTO trade obligations. I will close by saying the headwinds facing growers has intensified with the current fight against food inflation. Our farmers are bearing a disproportionate burden in that fight, pushing many to the brink. Consumers, retailers, and our government should be seen as partners in the effort to reduce food costs, and modernized, effective, investment-focused BRM is essential. so our farmers can continue feeding Canadians the safest, healthiest, and most nutritious food in the world. Thank you for the opportunity to share the perspective of Canadian fruit and vegetable growers, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Kromzak and Ms. Lassar. We will now proceed to questions from the senators. Senators, you will each have 5 minutes in the first round for your question or questions, and that does include your answer. We'll start with Deputy Chair, Senator McNair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to start with the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, and your website indicates that you represent growers throughout the country and advocate on important issues that impact Canada's fresh produce sector. We just came from a field fact-finding study that we were at the Ontario Food Terminal, so we saw a lot of produce from within Canada and outside of Canada going through there. I'm curious, the work of your group focuses on 4 key priorities according to your website: labor, which seems to be a common theme for everyone at the table today; crop protection, competitiveness, and applying a food lens to policy decisions. I'm curious, you've touched on the temporary foreign worker program and the seasonal agricultural worker program. How vital are they to Canada's produce sector? And are they working well at this time?
They're absolutely vital. It's the backbone of our sector. Without the workers on my farm and my peers' farms, we would not be able to produce the fresh fruits and vegetables that Canadians expect and demand. And the program has served us well. It's served our farms, our economy, and it's also served our workers and their homes, families, and communities very well also.
I'm curious about the return rate. Are you getting the same workers coming back each year, like in your personal situation?
I can speak to myself. I began fruit and vegetable farming in 2011, and I would say 75% of my workers are still the original group that came at that time. I'm so proud of the work that they do, and they've become a part of our family. Again, the core of our business. And each year, there's natural attrition. We may welcome 1 or 2 new employees, and they feel happy to join the team, and we're fortunate to have them. And it shows a consistent and healthy workplace and dynamic for the employees and for us as employers.
It's good to hear you confirm that. It's we heard one witness in the last little while that was indicating a bit of a different story, and the media sometimes picks up on the bad cases, but generally I find the Canadian farmers look after the foreign workers very well and develop those family relationships and rely on them.
We certainly appreciate that perspective. One initiative we've taken specifically in Ontario is we've launched a More Than a Migrant Worker campaign, and it highlights the stories, the good news stories behind the program. They've been to my farm, they've been to countless farms to interview workers, to hear their stories about how long they've been coming to Canada, how proud they are of their jobs, the career that they've built, as well as the impact it's had with their family and their community, the children they put through school, the businesses they've been able to start back home in their host country, their home country, and as well as the homes that they've built, and the impact it's had on again the country and the community.
On telling those stories, I hear similar stories in my province, and I know we talked about a similar situation where somebody was showing his children had all graduated with university degrees. Anyway, enough said. Just one other quick question. In your opinion, how should the federal government apply a food securities lens to policy decisions related to the fruit and vegetable industry specifically?
I think when we are looking at regulations, no matter for what ministry or in what area, often we do not consider what will be the impact for food. So the food lens is looking at any regulation, anything, and thinking of what would be the impact for the food sector, especially fruit and vegetables in our cases, and seeing will they affect that? Could there be an impact eventually of these regulations on our sector, and could it eventually change the ability for our farmers to provide fruit and vegetables? So this is the whole idea, not to forget that we contribute to the economy, and that, well, food is the basis of life. So this is the idea. More specifically, when we are looking into business risk management programs, it is also to make sure that these programs are effective for the fruit and vegetable sector. Often they were designed for in other sectors instead, be it grains, be it animal production or others. We are a small sector, but we are significant, and therefore we want to make sure that these programs also take into account our realities and our specificities.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Black.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks to each of our witnesses. You've answered many of my questions. I do have one, though, for Mr. Ross. Every year, CFA calculates the date by which the average Canadian household has earned enough income to cover its entire annual grocery costs. This day is marked as Food Freedom Day and was in early mid-February this year. This year, CFA noted, and I quote, "Global disruptions and inflationary pressures have further strained food affordability and food security across this country," unquote. Can you elaborate further on that? And do you expect that next year's Food Freedom Day might be down the way a bit?
So I will say thank you for the question, Senator. Food Freedom Day for quite some time has hovered generally around the same space, and it is a reflection of a couple dynamics. One is obviously the cost of food itself. The other is disposable income Canadians have available to them. And what we have seen is historically, it has not swung significantly over the years. However, what we do see in our analysis is the impact falls disproportionately on the lower income quintiles of Canada. So when you look across the entire spectrum of food affordability, that there's not dramatic change. However, what we have seen is an increasing inequality in the affordability relative to income levels in Canada. And I would say when we speak about the impacts of geopolitical uncertainty and turbulence, it speaks to my opening remarks around supply chain disruptions being a major driver of uncertainty and affordability constraints. And an example is, and this is a global issue relative to Canada, but certainly the regularity with which we now see labor disruptions in our supply chains and the halting of our economy that happens as a result of that has dramatic implications for farmers and their ability to invest and remain viewed as reliable suppliers. And I think there is, as I said before, we operate in a very interconnected system globally. So supply chain disruptions that happen in Canada that impact our ability to be resilient as a supply chain have bearing both domestically and globally on food security. And over time, what we are seeing is increased uncertainty and turbulence without policies necessarily keeping pace with that, leaving farmers in an uncertain environment and less able to invest in efficiencies and innovations that help address some of the structural issues around food affordability at the farm gate.
I had 3 pages of questions, and you've already answered them in your remarks. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Senator Black. Next, we'll go to Senator Mugley.
I have a whole slew of questions for all of you, so I may need second round. We'll see. But I'll start with fruit and vegetable growers. I'm interested in understanding whether you experience issues related to fluctuating access to shelf space with big grocers, or to preferential space, or whatever that might look like. I'm curious if you see an impact, and Mr. Ross might have some feedback on that too.
Our sector is quite diverse, and a lot of our products are fresh, ready to eat, primary products that hit the grocery store. Some are processed and value added, and that's where you may see a difference in between shelf space and the jockeying for position in the retailer. From the fresh standpoint, we are very fortunate to have usually preferential treatment as being the freshest, best valued produce of the entire year when we are in season. And thanks to provincial programs, I can speak to ours in Ontario with Foodland Ontario, promoting front of store display contests and display initiatives, so that when customers and consumers walk in, they see our fresh asparagus, greenhouse tomatoes, broccoli right at the beginning, at the front of the store. It helps identify that this is different than what I usually see for most of the year, and it helps to move that volume that we need to move when we are in season. I can't speak to the frozen aisle as well. Maybe Catherine could touch on that.
Yeah, we've been also working with fresh and vegetable, and I would like to add that we've seen some issues during the last months or a year, especially in increasing of what we found in China products being frozen or being fresh in the aisles of our retailers. We've seen a lot of Canadian frozen products, especially vegetable, disappearing and being replaced by Asian frozen vegetables. And we weren't expecting that, but this is also true in the fresh aisle. We're seeing carrots from China in main retailers, and also snow peas from China, which weren't there before. And it is worrisome because of, especially for the fresh vegetables, we want to make sure that we still have growers being able to grow these snow peas and these carrots. If they are being replaced by produce from China, eventually it can create a gap in the availability to deliver these produce to our
Having
consumers.
to pay more are big grocers charging you more to have preferential space on the shelves?
Not directly. We have to pay fees, of course, when we went to
Are
access
those fees
to the grocers.
fluctuating? Are they spontaneously increasing when you least expect it, or is it pretty stable?
It's changing from produce to produce and from a grower to a grower, so I cannot speak about a certain commodity or a certain grower, but we've seen, some changes in some
Do you have
some
recommendations about how that could be better managed?
We are asking for more predictability and transparency.
And how could that be provided?
Well, I think in these cases we have to have better communication with our retailers and make sure that this is clear and that we agree on these prices.
So do you think the code of conduct, it's voluntary? Do you think more needs to be done in that regard? Ms. Ross, you might have some feedback on that too.
Sure, I can speak to your first question in this as well. I think what we've seen over time, and maybe it speaks to some of the challenge answering that question directly, is often what we see is as pressure mounts on affordability, price reigns more and more supreme, and we've been bolstered lately by a Buy Canadian sentiment in Canada that's certainly helping mitigate some of that, but there's no question that we are seeing from the retail community increasing focus on the lowest price possible over value-driven purchasing sentiments. And to be fair, historically, despite sentiment about Buy Canadian, price has often reigned supreme in decision-making at the retail checkout. What I would say, we have an industry-led code of conduct that's just getting off the ground right now. We've been in contact with many of our colleagues in other jurisdictions like the UK and Australia that have gone through this exercise, and in many respects, the most important change that they saw come through a code of conduct was not necessarily individual disputes being resolved, but a culture change through more transparency, supply chain predictability, and dialogue up and down the supply chain. And so it's too early to say right now whether an industry-led voluntary code can be successful in enacting that kind of change. And we do have a year, we're just getting off the ground. I was part of the board of directors to start that code of conduct. And in a year's time, there's going to be a review to look at, is the voluntary code working? Because as a as a federation across Canada, the jurisdictional challenges of regulating a code is significant. And so we are putting our best foot forward as an industry to see if we can drive change, but it's to be seen. And so we're really encouraging at this point supply chain stakeholders to take part in that code and demonstrate whether it can accomplish the kind of culture change we need to see.
Do you think more can be done to...
Sorry, Senator Mugley, you're out
Second
of time.
round.
Thank you. You called it at the outset. Senator Sorensen.
Much all for being here. I'm directing my question to Ms. Wright. First of all, I'm delighted to find out that your organization exists. I live in Banff, where our only economy is tourism, and I had to come to Ottawa to learn that there's a Tourism HR Canada, and Phil is a fantastic advocate for our industry. You elaborated on a couple of questions I had for you around labor shortages and automation. I'm curious to know if there is a difference across the country. Are there areas that are more seriously in need of employees than others, and then sectors of the industry? And I'm also very curious to hear, and also maybe from Mr. Kromzak, about housing. Because in the meetings I have in many industries, tourism included, housing comes into play. In our industry, it's interesting. We tend to build housing for them, for TFWs. And also the path to permanent residency, if it does lead to, in terms of the temporary foreign worker program. And lastly, I'll just mention holiday work visas from other countries, which again are very popular in the industry I work in. Ms. Wright?
Thank you. Yes, thank you for pointing out the work that we do. And I know Phil well. I used to actually be their director of research years ago. So good connection, and work with them very closely as well. So with regards to agriculture specifically and regional differences, I would say there are labor shortages across every region and every aspect of the industry. We do see them more acute in some commodity groups more than others, and depending on the region, they may be a little bit greater than in other areas, especially if there's more competing industries around as well. As we know, every industry in Canada is facing labor shortages. Most industries are facing aging workforce, other than tourism, which has a quite young workforce, but that's another challenge on its own. It's something that's being felt across the board. From the temporary foreign worker point of view, when we look at our data, primary production data specifically, we talk about the need and the value that foreign workers bring. If we look at our 2022 data, we're looking at a shortage of just over 100,000 workers, of which temporary foreign workers fill 71,000 jobs. So if we did not have foreign workers, we would be in a serious situation. We still have a gap of about 28,000, and that's only in primary production. That's not the value chain. So it is an extremely important program for us. As far as pathway to permanency goes, it really depends on the commodity, because it doesn't work for all commodities. It also doesn't work for all of the workers. Not everyone wants to move to Canada permanently. And my colleagues from the fruit and vegetable growers gave great examples of workers coming and being part of our seasonal commodity production, and then returning home and bringing that value back to their homes, to their kids, to their communities. So I think pathway to permanency is one avenue, but it's not every avenue. And I think having that open dialogue and recognition of where it works and where it doesn't, I think is very important as well. From a housing point of view, there are standards in place that are, regulated through the process for, employing foreign workers. Some of that is federal, some is provincial, and some is municipal as well. But certainly a lot of standards that go into that, and depending on the program and the pathway or stream that workers are here on, depends on, what type of housing they have. I will just comment, though, a little bit on housing from just a general standpoint, we've done some research around infrastructure needs in attracting and retaining a workforce, specifically in rural Canada, and housing is a major concern for all workers, all employees in the industry, and making sure that that infrastructure is there to support attracting and retaining your workers no matter where they come from across Canada is very important. As far as holiday work visas go, I know that they are used, I believe, in the Okanagan, for example, with cherry production, fruit production as well, and maybe that's something that could be a bit more explored across Canada. Scott may have more details about that. That's not something that we've worked as closely with. Just know that it's well used in the Okanagan.
And you're bound to get an Australian server in Banff. I'm just going to ask, actually, Mr. Kromzak, because of his, if I have time, and I'd love to get to Mr. Ross too, his person.
Sorry, Senator Sorens, you're out of time. But we can put you on second round. Okay. So, yes, stand by. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Senator Bury.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Some familiar faces. So, again, Ms. Wright, I thank you for being here, all of you, but Ms. Wright in particular, because I too wasn't aware of the wonderful work your council is doing. And you, in your opening statement, you spoke about sort of three areas: the domestic talent pipeline, international workers, which I think we did spend some time on, and workforce planning. I want to go back to your first, the domestic talent pipeline. Can you tell us some more about that? I'm a pediatrician by training, and I'm always interested in getting kids involved in science and technology, and when I heard that, I was excited. So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So it's definitely an area I love to talk about as well. I have a son that's now 20. Many people have heard this story before, but he grew up in the city. I grew up on a farm, and he has that connection and desperately wants to be working in agriculture. But making those connections with the domestic labor workforce and with youth is extremely important. Some of the work that we've been doing through our, as a delivery organization of the Student Workplace Placement Program or Wage Subsidy Program for post-secondary students has helped us connect post-secondary students that wouldn't otherwise think of agriculture as a career with work experience while they're in school. So we're connecting technology students, biology students, agriculture students as well, of course, with agriculture employers to see where they can take their knowledge and skills once they're out of school in the agriculture sector. We have a significant amount of work to do. We have done some research around the perceptions of the industry for non-agriculture people, looking at where those career opportunities are and where they see themselves potentially in the industry. And surprisingly, over 50% of the respondents to that work, which was a significant survey, they couldn't recognize another occupation in agriculture other than being a farmer. Mm-hmm. Being a farmer, obviously, one of, if not the most important occupation in the industry, but there's so many other jobs across the industry to get connected in. And when we dug a little deeper, they thought it was a trick question. So, they were really committed to that. So, and I often say agriculture is a fantastic sector. We're really good at telling each other how great the sector is. But we need a little bit more work in reaching out. And our organization is working on doing that. There's a number of other organizations like Ag in the Classroom Canada, 4-H, the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, CFA, and other groups reaching out beyond our circle of people we see and getting that message out a little bit more. So a lot of work still needs to be done, both on the post-secondary side and in schools, reaching out again to those audiences that aren't connected day to day to learn more about what we have to offer for careers.
Could you just comment a little bit further on how important this is for food security and to use your term, food sovereignty?
So when we look at the labor supply, agriculture has the oldest workforce of any industry. The average age is 58 just on the primary production side. So, farmers and people in agriculture like to work for a long time, but they're going to retire at some point. And so when we look at that supply of young people coming in, it's really decreasing. We're looking at populations across Canada in rural areas declining. We're looking at not as many smaller families in general, but smaller farm families, and not as many kids in those farm families going on into succession and taking over the farm. So it's essential that we are making the connections, not only with students, but with mid-career people as well. And as we see the, economy shift and workforces shift, we need to have the mechanisms there to connect in with people that may be looking for new opportunities and seeing where they can apply their skills that they've earned in one sector into our sector as well. Raising that awareness that you can be a drone operator and work in agriculture. You can be a data analyst and work in agriculture. There's so many opportunities and so many people in our domestic workforce that have those skills that can come and work in agriculture as well.
Have a little bit more time? No.
8 seconds. We'll tag it on to second round if you wish, Senator Beery. I'm going to ask a question. I'm building on the discussion of succession and the aging farmer, 58. Ever since I've been in agriculture, it's always just been a few years beyond where I am, which is crazy. I wanted to tie that back to the business risk management suite of programs, one of my favorite topics, as Mr. Ross knows. And I wanted to ask Mr. Kromzak in particular. I'm going to ask, were you born into a farm family, or did you enter from the outside?
I appreciate the question, Senator Robinson. I'm a third-generation farmer. My grandparents immigrated from Europe after the war, and I grew up actually growing tobacco, and then have transitioned it in my generation into a fruit and vegetable farm.
So that leads nicely into my question about when we look at the business risk management suite of programs, and we heard you say you want more certainty. And we look at the kind of the natural consolidation or amalgamation that we see on the primary side in order to respond to the demand for economies of scale from the buyers. And I'm wondering if you'd mentioned 13 years ago, so I think in 2013 we saw that BRM suite kind of gutted, and we've seen a lack of keeping up with inflation, let alone with investment and raising thresholds because of that consolidation. If we were to look at your grandparents' farm to your farm and look at the cash flow and the input costs and just generally the cost of land, all of it driving it up, I'm wondering if you could speak to how greater certainty through BRM might facilitate succession, and in the end, the result would be contributing to Canada's food sovereignty as well as our ability to access and have a sustainable food strategy.
Excellent question, Senator, and I genuinely appreciate it. Certainty with respect to BRM is crucial to our growers, to our partners, to our financiers, and the bottom line is growers aren't growing because of safety net programs. They just know that they're there just in case. But competitiveness has become a major issue, and as inflation has hit, farm gate sales have risen. The budget committed to BRM programs has not kept up and followed suit, whereas neighboring jurisdictions, particularly the United States, have invested billions of dollars in direct farm cash incentives and programs that we need to compete with. They're able to subsidize their margin in a lot of cases. The Market Assistance for Specialty Crop Program was one in particular that was announced last year. It was a $2.85 billion U.S. program that was a pure cash injection to farmers to find new markets. And those markets are ones that we are competing in. And, we do not have a similar mechanism. Farmers are inherently resilient. We're determined, but to a certain point, we can only compete so much, and we can only operate on razor-thin margins and negative margins for so long. So that's where programs like AgriStability, agri-insurance are so vital to us. And I mentioned the advance payment program as another investment in our operations. And I see the program as a partnership in recognize the value of domestically grown fruits and vegetables and all agricultural commodities.
Thank you. I have a minute left, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ross to weigh in on this as well, if he wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. And I think building on Mr. Krumsack's comments, I would flag, I think there's a couple elements when it comes to business risk management that warrant attention, and it's not just the dollars and amount spent, but that they're actually responsive to the needs of the industry. And one of the challenges Canada faces is we have whole farm one-size-fits-all programs, and the extension of that often is that one size doesn't quite fit anyone particularly well, and there are many sectors, particularly in horticulture, we see it in livestock and in greenhouse production as examples, where many of the tools that we have available in Canada for business risk management are not available to them, and we have inequities in the level of support, and continue to hear from many farmers, for example, that are highly diversified, that they find the tools do not really serve their interests particularly well. So where I think certainty is important, responsiveness and flexibility in what farmers can access and the nature of those tools is critical as well, just to layer on to that. So ensuring that we are looking at not crowding out the private sector, looking at innovative tools development that help serve some of the more niche needs, and a recognition, I think, increasingly across our sector that we need to complement these one-size-fits-all tools with more options and choice for farmers so they can really tailor their risk management strategies to their individual needs versus trying to fit into round pegs into square holes.
Mr. Krumsack. Next, we will go to Senator Mugley.
So many questions still, trying to get as much of your knowledge in the record as possible because you have so much to offer today. Ms. Wright, you mentioned something earlier about food being left in the fields due to lack of workforce. Does anyone have data on how much food was left in the fields because of inability to harvest related to workforce?
We don't have the exact data on that. We have our estimates through our economic modeling that because we don't have enough workers, it'd be about an impact of $3.5 billion, and that was in 2022. We did see also, as my colleagues from fruit and vegetable growers outlined, during the COVID pandemic, that there was significant amount of food left in the field. They may have some more data on that specifically, but certainly there is a direct correlation. We're seeing, farms leave the industry totally, farmers retiring or selling their land because they just can't find enough workers, and it's a process of, our employer surveys will show that they're doing, 30 to 35% more work to cover the shortage of their labor supply. You can't do that forever. So that's where I would come at from a data point of view, but I'd turn it.
Data looking forward on what that could potentially look like if we don't fix that problem. If anyone has it. Mr. Ross?
I don't think there's a modeling undertaken. One of the challenges I would say is that it's not the impact of the labor shortage is not only felt in field, like product left in the field, it's often reduced value available. So whether that's on a packing line where they're not able to process some of the cuts that would otherwise give more value to a carcass, it manifests itself in so many different areas that there's certainly work going on looking at the impacts on farm margins and what this means from a profitability perspective, but it's very hard because of the complexity of all the different climate variables and other things to model what is going to happen in the future, because in many respects it's not just the labor shortage itself, it's how it interacts with some of the other dynamics farmers are having to deal with.
So I'm interested in the transportation of goods as well, and timely transportation. We met on our field excursion with an organization called Second Harvest, and we noted that sometimes when you can't have timely transportation, you have excess food that ends up at Second Harvest, which is fine, it's being used, but I'm curious about impact of non-timely transportation, and if there's anything that you would recommend for our report on how to address transportation of goods.
speak to. I mean, one of the immediate points that comes to mind is addressing interprovincial barriers around trucker mobility. We have a massive shortage in trucking across the country, and it's constrained a lot by artificial barriers between the provinces, whether that's in terms of licensing regimes, tire weights, various other things that require disruptions in the flow of goods across provinces that are really unnecessary at the end of the day, and break what could be a large Canadian market into many smaller markets for producers, or add cost transactionally to change trucks at the border and other things like that. And these are all well understood issues that we have seen attention devoted to, but rubber needs to hit the road, pardon the pun, in some of these areas to really see those barriers addressed. So there's certainly regulatory issues that constrain it. And then I would say more generally, where we are seeing real concern, and this speaks to our export markets as well, is Canada is facing an unprecedented regularity of labor disruptions in terms of strikes and work stoppages in critical infrastructure for our farming community. And while some of that product is necessarily going to export, it has broader implications across the entire agri-food industry in terms of certainty, resilience, and the ability to invest. And Canada is increasingly concerned, I think farmers are, that we are losing that ability to be viewed as a reliable supplier of goods by virtue of this. And it is one of those areas that is so wholly outside the control of farmers that they're really looking for external policy support to help address this and find ways to not in any way prevent effective collective bargaining, but ensure that there's less of an incentive to strike and more of a timed process that allows for these things to happen in a way that doesn't disrupt the economy.
Really appreciate that feedback. It's really important for our study. Since you're still talking, what's your top recommendation for us on how to support your work on code of conduct?
I would say, like I mentioned earlier, we have a one-year review, I think, where we need to really look at how things are playing out in the code. And in the interim, I would say one of the concerns we have is focusing exclusively on the retail purchasing point and artificially constraining retail prices often has very deleterious effects on the supply chain, because those pressures get downloaded on processors and farmers who have no ability to pass those along. And so I think what's critical is looking at the provisions of the code, and we need to take the time to assess whether the code is driving the kind of change we hope to see. It is those sort of practice-based principles that are addressing good practices in the supply chain, promoting transparency, setting rules around those things that are really vital. If you just focus on the retail endpoint, you're exposing everyone in the supply chain to turbulence, volatility, and probably undermining the kind of transparency and predictability we need. It's really vital to look at, will the code have sufficient teeth through naming and shaming, which is primarily the vehicle they will have to enact change and this culture change I speak to. If that has substance and actually does see that kind of culture change, I think it's a very positive development, but it's wait and see at this point. And I will say farmers, by and large, are very concerned about retaliation and reprisal in this system. So it is really systemic, and culture change is warranted, because even in other countries where they have regulated codes, there's still an understanding it's very hard to prove reprisal or retaliation. Whether a retailer chooses to do business with another farmer or somebody else, is very hard to ascertain what's behind that. And so it really is critical that there's this understanding of we all benefit collectively as a supply chain through more efficiency, transparency, and predictability. And that really is part of what's unique to the Canadian Code, is that it's accountable both ways. Suppliers are held accountable under our code, as well as the retail side. But the proof will be in the pudding at the end of the day as to whether this is working or not, at which point I think there does need to be a further kind of conversation of this kind to see, is it really enacting the kind of change that we hope to see.
Thank you for that answer.
Senator Sorensen, did you want to?
Yeah, can I just, if you recall, Mr. Kromzak and maybe Mr. Ross, just elaborate a little bit. I enjoy the stories of your personal experience. So the housing piece and the path to permanent residency, and then maybe Mr. Ross on a higher level.
Yeah, I would certainly comment on the housing. We're all aware of the national housing crisis. Farmers and our workers are certainly not immune or unaffected by it. We're seeing it directly on our farms. At a time when we're looking for nation-building opportunities and investments, we see investments in food production as an opportunity to protect food security and food sovereignty. One of those opportunities could and should be in on-farm housing. We've gotten to a point where many of our larger farms might need to house workers off farm. And that's displacing other home seekers and renters from those units. The opportunity and the value of having our workers on the farm makes things safer, more efficient, and more comfortable for our workers. There are countless stories, and again, it's going to require municipal, provincial, and federal cooperation and initiative here. But there are examples of development fees alone costing in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to put up a housing unit on a farm, and then further regulations regarding setbacks, septic, etc. And a program or an investment into helping growers to increase the number of units, the quality of units, would be definitely beneficial and help support that food security perspective. We've undeniably seen an incredible increase in the standard of housing since COVID. COVID was an eye-opener for a lot of people. We see things through a different lens now. The workers on my farm and myself were so proud of our homes, leading up to COVID, and then COVID changed everything. And since then, we have built new homes on the farm. We have more space for our workers. We have amenities with high-speed internet, laundry facilities, air conditioning, more privacy, more space, and those are things that we're proud of. But those were significant investments that we bear as growers. But it's an investment in the quality of life for our workers and the productivity and outcome on our farms. So we see value in it. It would definitely be beneficial to have a partner in those investments as well.
Mr. Ross, a couple of comments. I don't know when we're going to get the stare down.
I would focus on the point Mr. Kromzak made. I think is one of the challenges with housing is the multiple orders of government involved in the constraints. And ultimately, there's been an active discussion for years now about federal housing standards in this program. And the unfortunate reality is there's so many cooks in the kitchen, and whether it's municipal bylaws and zoning requirements that limit, for example, a farmer's ability to have multiple housing units on their property, that it's very challenging to see that realized. But the knock-on effect of this discussion happening without a apparent sort of end result is uncertainty around investment, because there is a reluctance to invest if there's an understanding that the rules are going to change suddenly. And so that certainly is a point of concern. On your other question around pathways to permanent residency, I think to Ms. Wright's comments earlier, it's not the same for seasonal versus year-round labor. Right. And so there are sectors of our industry that are very reliant on and have demonstrated track records of effective pathway to permanency. The challenge we often find is eligibility criteria in federal immigration policies are very limiting and constraining for agri-food workers' ability to enter the country, whether that's educational needs, language requirements. And we did see we were very pleased to see an agri-food immigration pilot put in place, but it has subsequently sunset, and we are very strongly calling for the return of that on a permanent basis. It's not going to solve all the problems in this space, but it certainly gives certainty and predictability, not only to the primary production side, but increasingly farmers are also feeling the effects of constraints on the processing space, where they're also struggling to find access to workers. And it's those industries, the year-round side of labor needs and the processing community, where we vitally need that pathway to permanent residency to help complement temporary foreign workers in the seasonal space that, as Ms. Wright said earlier, don't necessarily want to live in Canada on a permanent basis. Right. And so ultimately, it's a vital part of the puzzle. It's not the whole solution, but there is not one panacea in this. It's a very complicated issue at the end of the day.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one last question before we wrap up, and it is kind of for Mr. Ross. I'm wondering, we certainly are in a time of great instability, and we're seeing every time we turn the news on, and we're being faced with consumers feel it at the gas pumps, at the fuel pumps. And I'm thinking, as your 190,000 plus farms that you represent are faced with the biggest ticket item of their year, which is putting the crop in the ground, which I don't know, does anyone have the number? Like, to put the crop in the ground in Canada well exceeds $50 billion. So, and that would be maybe using last year's pricing. So when we look now at what farmers are facing and the massive amount of uncertainty. I saw in the news today a farmer in the prairies saying his fertilizer was up 60%. And this is, on the eve of putting the crop in the ground. And we know that there are barriers to entry to market for fresh fruit and vegetable as they try to get space and have arrangements with grocers. We know that food processors like to have their contracts in place so they've got predictability for their sales. And we know that commodity prices are something that farmers have no ability to change. So taking into account that primary producers are, for all intents and purposes, price takers, meaning they have no opportunity to influence the price they're being paid, can you speak to the impact of this uncertainty on your members?
Well, I think it's considerable, and it's not necessarily realized and felt today. The implications of it are the long-term ability to continue to invest in efficiency and innovation and into their operations moving forward. So there's certainly fundamental viability challenges for some farmers that are going to be faced by the inability to have that certainty. But I would say the concern overall is what is the long-term implications of this uncertainty on the sector's ability to continue to invest and address the competitiveness concerns that Mr. Kromzak referenced earlier. I think there are a lot of tools in the toolbox that can help address this. Things like, as we look at a national food school program, that has the potential with the right procurement policies in place to provide defined volumes and demand for Canadian farmers that can help support, revenue diversification, stability. But at the end of the day, I think the consequence of this uncertainty is uncertainty around planting decisions, implications for their ability to invest and grow their operations moving forward. And that's a space that's critical. You mentioned crop inputs and the cost of putting the crop in the ground. I think we need to really explore a critical input strategy for our sector to make sure that we have supply chains that are resilient to supply us. We saw this with the Ukraine-Russia conflict and tariffs applied on Russian fertilizer, and Eastern Canada suddenly facing dramatic shortages or increased cost. And similarly, with the current conflicts in the Strait of Hormuz, there's obviously concerns around access to fertilizer as well. So I think when we talk about a national food security strategy, we need to look at the entire value chain to make sure farmers have greater predictability so they know they can invest when times are good versus sitting on capital, which is, as you well know, and if you speak to any farmers, they're more than excited to invest in their operations, but they need the foundation to make sure that they can do so with that predictability, that they're not undermining their viability for future years.
I have about a minute left. I'm hoping to have time for Senator Beery. I wanted to ask one question, Mr. Kromzak, of you. Can you tell us what do you pay your foreign workers versus your domestic workers? And what does it cost you to have a foreign worker versus a domestic worker? Quite quickly, if you could.
Yes. The wage rate for our workers are negotiated set at the set by in the negotiation process. This year, our workers will be paid $16.85 an hour on the farm. When we calculate in transportation costs, housing expenses, amenities on the farm, we typically calculate costs being closer to $25 per hour per worker. Our local workers, students that I would have working on the farm, would be paid that same wage for the same job as my workers would do, and then highly skilled trades are paid obviously prevailing market rates above that.
Costs you more to employ your foreign worker than it does your domestic worker?
Certainly costs me more, absolutely. But comes with proven track record, reliability, and there's certainly the value in my team for sure.
Perfect. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you all for taking the time to appear for us today. This has been incredibly informative. Thank you so much. We appreciate your contribution to the study. Thank you to the interpreters, pages, support staff, technicians, and all those who ensure we as senators can conduct our work in the committee setting in a timely fashion. If there is no other business, honorable senators, this meeting is adjourned.